Ever wanted to be a pirate captain? Think twice. Their lives weren't all treasure and rum. Behind the fearsome reputation and fancy hat lay a dangerous reality few survived to tell about. In the golden age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730, captaincy wasn't handed down from father to son like some royal title. The position of captain was granted by the very men who would serve under him, the crew themselves, a bunch of hardened criminals standing on deck, weapons within reach, voting on who should lead them. Pirates were surprisingly organized when it came to choosing leadership. They valued skill, courage, and the promise of profit above all else. Think of it as the world's most dangerous job interview where team player meant won't stab you in your sleep. A captain who brings no prizes makes but a poor figure in the company, wrote one historian. This wasn't just a figure of speech. A captain who couldn't deliver loot would quickly find himself demoted, or worse. According to historical facts, over 25% of known pirate captains were removed by their own crews through mutiny when profits ran dry or leadership faltered. Talk about a tough performance review. Many successful captains began as naval officers who jumped ship when they realized piracy offered better pay and more freedom. Others were merchant sailors who had suffered under brutal captains and decided to take control of their own destinies. Some were actually privateers, legally sanctioned pirates who worked for governments before going rogue. Consider one notorious pirate who didn't want to join the trade at all. He was a second mate on a slave ship when pirates captured it. When forced to join, he figured if he had to be a pirate, he might as well be the captain. Within weeks, he had impressed the crew enough to be elected captain after the previous one died. Under his leadership, his crew captured over 400 ships in just 3 years. But becoming captain was just the first challenge. Keeping the position was the real test. A pirate captain held power only as long as the crew allowed it. Unlike naval vessels where mutiny was punishable by death, on pirate ships, the captain served at the pleasure of his men. The moment he showed weakness, indecision, or cowardice, someone else would step up to challenge him. The path to becoming captain was treacherous, but for those who made it, the rewards could be substantial. Of course, those rewards came with strings attached, like managing a crew of violent criminals while staying one step ahead of the law. Now that you know how someone climbed to the top of the pirate ladder, let's talk about what happened once they got there. At first glance, being a pirate captain seemed like hitting the career jackpot in the 1700s. While ordinary sailors in the merchant or royal navies earned pitiful wages, often went unpaid, and suffered brutal discipline, pirate captains enjoyed significant advantages, though their job security left something to be desired. The most obvious benefit was the money. When dividing plunder, captains typically received between 2 and 5 times the share of an ordinary crew member. This might not sound like much compared to today's corporate world, but it was remarkably fair for the era. A good haul could set a captain up for life, if he lived long enough to spend it, which was admittedly a big if in the piracy business. One particularly successful pirate captain amassed wealth equivalent to $100 million in today's money during just 3 years of piracy. His secret? Targeting ships carrying gold, silver, and valuable commodities like silk and spices rather than everyday merchant vessels. Inside these quarters, captains kept their maps, navigational tools, weapons, and personal treasures. Some even transported furniture, artwork, and other luxuries stolen from captured ships. One captain was found with silver dining ware, silk bedding, and several musical instruments in his cabin when finally captured. Food and drink provided another stark difference between captain and crew. While ordinary pirates subsisted mainly on hardtack, salt beef, and grog, captains enjoyed better provisions. Fresh fruits, preserved meats, fine wines, and brandy were common captain's privileges. One captain insisted on having limes with his daily rum, unknowingly preventing scurvy while his crew suffered from vitamin deficiencies and terrible breath. But the greatest perk wasn't material at all, it was freedom. In an age when most sailors were practically slaves to tyrannical captains, pirate captains answered to no authority but their crew. They could set their own course, choose their targets, and make their own rules. This independence was revolutionary and deeply appealing in the rigidly hierarchical 18th century. Captains faced tremendous pressure. Every decision carried life or death consequences. Choose the wrong ship to attack, and you might encounter superior firepower. Sail too close to naval patrols, and you risk the noose. Make an unpopular decision, and your own crew might turn against you. perhaps the original tough crowd. The psychological toll was immense. Pirates lived in a state of constant hypervigilance, never knowing when danger might strike from enemy ships, naval vessels, or their own crew. Many turned to heavy drinking to cope with the stress, further compromising their judgment and health. Legal consequences added another layer of danger. While ordinary crew members might receive pardons if captured, captains were almost always executed. The British Navy paid special attention to capturing pirate captains, offering bounties that sometimes exceeded $500, a fortune at the time. Once caught, captains faced public execution, often at the aptly named Execution Dock in London, where their bodies were left hanging in metal cages as warnings to others. The isolation of command created another burden. Despite being surrounded by people, captains couldn't afford to form close friendships with crew members. Such relationships could be seen as favoritism, breeding resentment, or as weakness that could be exploited. Many captains kept pet parrots or monkeys as companions, perhaps explaining the enduring pirate-parrot connection and why your boss might seem so attached to that plant in their office. So, was it worth becoming captain? For the majority who ended their days at the end of a rope or with a cutlass through the heart, the answer is less clear. The lure of wealth, freedom, and power proved irresistible to many, even with the odds stacked against them. For all the gold and glory, a captain's life at sea came with unique challenges, starting with something as fundamental. The word luxury meant something quite different on a pirate ship than it does today. For the captain, having any privacy at all was considered the height of opulence. While the average pirate slept wherever space allowed, often crammed together like sardines below deck, the captain enjoyed the relative comfort of the great cabin. Located at the stern of the ship, the great cabin typically measured around 15 feet wide by 10 feet deep. It was hardly spacious, but compared to the crowded conditions elsewhere on the ship, it might as well have been a palace. The cabin's location wasn't chosen randomly. Being at the stern meant the captain had the best view of the entire ship from his windows, allowing him to keep an eye on both his crew and the horizon. A useful feature when your employees were known for their mutinous tendencies. These windows were perhaps the most coveted feature of the captain's quarters. While ordinary crew members lived in perpetual darkness or by the dim light of oil lamps, the captain's cabin had natural illumination. On larger pirate vessels, these stern windows could be quite elaborate, sometimes containing actual glass, a rare commodity on ships where most windows were simply openings covered with oiled cloth. But those windows came with drawbacks. During storms, waves would crash against the stern, sending water pouring through even the best sealed windows. Speaking of beds, what did a pirate captain sleep on? Contrary to popular belief, very few had actual bedsteads. Most used hammocks just like their crew. However, a captain's hammock was likely to be wider, made of better materials, and might even include stolen luxuries like feather pillows or silk sheets. Some particularly successful pirate captains did manage to install fixed beds, usually bolted to the floor to prevent shifting during rough seas, though no amount of bolting could prevent the occasional midnight tumble during storms, adding an unexpected element of excitement to the captain's slumber. The floor beneath their feet set captains apart as well. While most of the ship had bare wooden decking, many captains covered their cabin floors with rugs or carpets stolen from merchant vessels. These weren't just for comfort. They reduced noise and provided some insulation against the cold dampness that pervaded wooden ships. They also made for convenient places to hide treasure maps, or at least convince suspicious crew members that's where they were hidden. Furnishings were minimal, but meaningful. A table and chair were standard, luxuries unknown to ordinary crew members who are standing or sitting on barrels. Some captains' cabins included looted items like mirrors, small libraries, or even musical instruments. One captured pirate ship revealed a captain's cabin containing a harpsichord, several books of sheet music, and a collection of fine wines, all stolen from various merchant vessels. Apparently, some pirates preferred bock to rum when unwinding after a hard day of plundering. Who needs a parrot when you've got Mozart? Temperature control was non-existent. In tropical waters, the cabin could become unbearably hot, especially since the windows often had to be closed during naval battles or storms. In northern climes, the cabin might be freezing. Unlike naval officers' quarters, few pirate captains' cabins had fireplaces or stoves due to the fire risk. Instead, they relied on layers of stolen clothing and bedding to stay warm. Many feared pirate captains secretly wore silk undergarments, not for the luxury, mind you, but for the extra layer of insulation. Privacy was perhaps the greatest luxury of all, though it was more theoretical than actual. The thin wooden walls provided little soundproofing, and tradition allowed crew members to approach the captain at any time for important matters. Some captains have the frustration of never truly being alone. One pirate leader complained he couldn't even sneeze without 3 men rushing in to make sure he wasn't being murdered. The original open-door management policy had its downsides. Cleanliness varied widely. Some captains were notoriously filthy, while others maintained surprising standards of hygiene. Pirates who had served in national navies often brought military standards of cleanliness to their cabins. Others lived in squalor, surrounded by half-eaten food, empty bottles, and vermin. Ship's logs from naval vessels that captured pirate ships often mentioned the disgusting state of even the captain's quarters. Perhaps this explains why parrots were so popular. They were the only companions who wouldn't complain about the smell. The captain's quarters weren't always private or even his. If the ship needed to move faster or prepare for battle, the great cabin was often sacrificed for operational needs. The space might be cleared for additional cannons or storage of captured goods. During naval engagements, the cabin frequently served as an emergency surgery, where the ship's surgeon would treat wounded crew members. Nothing quite ruined the cozy ambiance like a makeshift operating table. Despite these limitations, the captain's quarters remained a coveted space that symbolized the highest achievement in the pirate world. For men who had often started their seafaring careers sleeping on bare decks or crowded hammocks, having a room, even a small leaky one, to call their own represented the pinnacle of success. But a captain's day involved far more than just enjoying his private quarters. Beyond the relative luxury of his small domain, the daily routine of a pirate captain was anything but relaxing. From sunrise to sunset, and often well into the night, a captain's life was a constant juggling act of responsibilities that would make modern CEOs look like slackers. Daybreak typically found the captain already awake and planning. Many rose before the sun, using the quiet dawn hours to study maps, chart courses, or write in their logs. Early morning was also when captains would assess weather conditions and make critical navigational decisions. A good captain could read the sky like a book, predicting storms hours before they hit. This wasn't just a useful skill, it was often the difference between life and death for the entire crew, not to mention saving everyone the embarrassment of being the ship that sank in perfectly avoidable weather. There's no coming back from that kind of reputation damage. By mid-morning, the ship was in full swing, and the captain's real work began. Unlike naval vessels with their rigid chains of command, pirate ships operated under a strange mix of democracy and dictatorship. During normal sailing, the captain needed to consult his officers, the quartermaster, boatswain, and sailing master, before making major decisions. This often meant daily meetings where strategies were debated, sometimes heatedly. The original boardroom battles, just with more actual swords and significantly fewer spreadsheets. There was a pirate journal that describes a captain who held these meetings while pacing the deck with a loaded pistol, to encourage quick decisions and discourage foolish suggestions. Another captain insisted all disagreements be settled with arm wrestling rather than duels, a practical, if somewhat undignified solution to maintaining crew harmony. Nothing says respected leadership quite like winning arguments by having the strongest forearms in the Caribbean. The most successful captains were those who mastered the art of delegation. A ship couldn't be run by one man alone, no matter how talented. The quartermaster handled discipline and food rationing, the boatswain managed repairs and maintenance, and the sailing master handled navigation. But the captain still needed to oversee it all, stepping in when problems arose. Essentially, history's first micromanagers, only with the added bonus of being able to make insubordination punishable by marooning. Food management was a constant concern. Pirate ships typically carried provisions for 3 months at most, and spoilage was a perpetual issue. Captains had to carefully balance rationing with crew morale. Too strict, and they risked mutiny. Too generous, and they risked starvation if winds died or routes changed. Historical facts show that approximately 20% of pirate voyages faced serious food shortages, forcing crews to resort to eating rats, leather, or worse. Medical matters also fell under the captain's purview. While larger ships might have a surgeon, most pirate vessels made do with whatever medical knowledge the captain or crew possessed. This often meant brutal but effective solutions to common seafaring ailments. One pirate captain reportedly treated scurvy by forcing his men to eat citrus fruits at gunpoint, having observed their effectiveness in the British Navy but facing resistance from his suspicious crew. Take your medicine or take a bullet was apparently a compelling healthcare plan. Battle strategy consumed much of a captain's mental energy. When to attack, when to flee, and when to bluff were decisions that fell squarely on the captain's shoulders. Contrary to popular belief, successful pirate captains preferred intimidation to actual fighting. Over 60% of merchant vessels surrendered without a fight when confronted by notorious pirate flags. A wise captain cultivated a fearsome reputation precisely to avoid bloodshed, which could damage valuable cargo and crew. After all, why risk your neck when just looking scary could do the job? Early pirates understood that good branding was everything. When battles did occur, the captain was expected to lead from the front. This wasn't just tradition, it was practical psychology. A crew fought harder when their leaders shared their risks. This explains the high casualty rate among pirate captains. They were typically the first targeted by defending ships and the most exposed during boarding actions. It's hard to yell "charge" convincingly from behind a barrel. Crew management required constant attention too. Pirates were not known for their patience or discipline. Conflicts erupted regularly over everything from work assignments to treasure shares. The captain had to resolve these disputes quickly before they escalated into violence that could tear the crew apart. Many captains developed unique methods for handling disagreements. A creative captain would force quarreling pirates to sit back-to-back on a barrel in the middle of the deck until they resolved their differences or simply grew too tired to continue fighting. The original timeout chair, just with more splinters and significantly higher stakes. When not sailing in battle or resolving conflicts, captains focused on intelligence gathering. Whenever they made port or encountered other vessels, they would seek information about potential targets, naval patrols, or political changes that might affect their operations. A well-informed captain could predict shipping routes, identify valuable cargoes, and avoid dangerous areas. The job description essentially required being part sailor, part CEO, and part gossip columnist. Except when pirates eavesdropped on conversations, it was usually followed by robbery. Evenings brought different challenges. Alcohol was a central part of pirate life, with daily rum rations being standard practice. While this kept morale high, it also led to fights, accidents, and poor decision-making. The captain had to carefully monitor drinking, allowing enough to maintain happiness, but preventing complete chaos. Some captains joined in the revelry to boost morale, while others remained conspicuously sober, knowing that naval attacks or storms could come at any moment. Being the only sober person on a ship full of drunk pirates might be the true definition of courage. Night watches required the captain's attention as well. Though he wouldn't personally stand watch through the night, he would set the schedule and often check on sentries to ensure they remained alert. Many pirate ships were lost because tired or drunk watchmen failed to spot approaching danger in time. Nothing ruins your day quite like waking up to cannon fire because your lookout decided stargazing was more interesting than watching for enemy ships. Throughout all these activities, the captain had to maintain the delicate balance between friend and leader. Too familiar and he'd lose authority. Too distant and he'd lose loyalty. This wasn't just a matter of personality, but of survival. Records show that approximately 25% of pirate captains were removed through mutiny, often because they failed to find this balance. Being voted out as pirate captain was considerably more painful than modern corporate severance packages, typically involving a plank rather than a golden parachute. Perhaps the most striking aspect of a pirate captain's daily life was its unpredictability. A calm morning could transform into a desperate chase by noon, a fierce battle by afternoon, and a celebration over captured treasure by evening. This constant state of readiness took a heavy toll, explaining why many captains aged prematurely or turned to heavy drinking. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the position of captain remained the aspiration of nearly every pirate. The authority, the relative comfort, and most importantly, the larger share of plunder made the risks worthwhile for those brave or foolish enough to seek the role. After all this effort and sacrifice, a pirate captain's life was never dull. Each day brought new challenges and decisions that would make even the most hardened sailor question their career choice. Yet for all the glory and gold they might accumulate during their time at the helm, The final chapter of a pirate captain's story often took unexpected turns. Few pirate captains lived long enough to worry about retirement. Their careers typically ended in one of three ways: the noose, the sword, or the rare escape into obscurity. Death by execution was the most common finale. When captured, captains rarely received mercy, while ordinary crew members might claim coercion and occasionally receive pardons. The authorities made examples of these men through public hangings that drew thousands. Records show approximately 60% of known pirate captains ended their days at the gallows. London's infamous Execution Dock saw dozens of captains meet their end. Pirates were deliberately hanged with shorter ropes that wouldn't break their necks instantly, a process grimly called dancing the hempen jig. Their tarred bodies were often displayed in iron cages along the Thames as warnings, some remaining visible for years. Death in battle claimed captains who avoided capture. Naval records indicate roughly 25% died during combat. Their prominent position and distinctive clothing made them primary targets for enemy marksmen. Only about 10 to 15% of pirate captains managed to retire or escape their past. Some accumulated enough wealth to quietly disappear into colonial territories. Others received rare pardons during amnesty periods. A few even became privateers, legally preying on enemy shipping during wartime. For those who survived, life after piracy meant constant fear of recognition. One notorious Caribbean pirate reportedly lived his final years jumping at every knock, sleeping with pistols until old age claimed him, a death more peaceful than he deserved. From managing deadly crews to navigating treacherous waters, a pirate captain's life was filled with danger. Their brief careers were intense bursts of adventure, violence, and occasionally wealth. But the sea is unforgiving, and no captain's luck lasted forever. Their legacy lives on in our romanticized view of what was actually a brutal profession with exceedingly poor career prospects.